I, 35F, am married to Tom, 37M, for 12 years. We have 2 kids, Lily, 10F, and Max, 8M. About 3 months ago, Tom's father, Carl, 68M, moved in with us after he lost his job and couldn't afford his apartment anymore. To give some background, Tom and I met in college. We were both studying business, and we hit it off immediately. Tom was always close to his family, especially his dad. Carl was a charming, outgoing guy who could light up a room with his stories. He worked as a sales manager for a manufacturing company and was always the life of the party at company events. When Tom introduced me to his family, Carl welcomed me with open arms. He'd always joked that Tom had finally found someone who could keep up with his terrible jokes. Over the years, Carl became like a second father to me. He was there for us when we bought our first house, helped us move, and was over the moon when our kids were born. But things started to change about 5 years ago when Carl's wife, Tom's mom, passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack. It hit Carl hard. He became withdrawn and started drinking more. Tom and I tried to be there for him, inviting him over for dinners and encouraging him to seek grief counseling, but he always brushed off our concerns. Fast forward to 3 months ago. Carl called Tom in a panic, saying he'd been laid off from his job. Apparently, the company was downsizing, and Carl, being one of the older employees, was let go. He admitted he hadn't been saving much for retirement, always assuming he'd work until he couldn't anymore. With no income and little savings, he couldn't afford his apartment anymore. Tom and I had a long discussion about what to do. We have a spare room that we've been using as a home office, and we decided to offer it to Carl. We thought it would be temporary, maybe a few months until he could find another job or figure out his finances. At first, having Carl around was nice. He'd play with the kids after school, telling them stories about their dad's childhood antics. He even tried to cook dinner a few times, though his culinary skills left much to be desired. But as the weeks went by, things started to change. Carl began interfering with our daily routines. He'd constantly pull the kids away from their homework or chores to watch TV or play games with him. If Lily was practicing piano, Carl would turn up the volume on the TV in the next room. When Max was trying to finish a school project, Carl would insist on showing him just one more magic trick. If Tom was doing yard work, Carl would insist on going for a drive or to the hardware store, which always turned into hours-long excursions. They'd come back with bags full of unnecessary gadgets or tools, and Tom would sheepishly admit they'd also stopped for a few beers at the local pub. The worst part was that Carl seemed to think he was exempt from helping around the house. He'd leave his dishes in the sink, clothes on the floor, and expect me to clean up after him. When I asked him to pitch in, he'd say he was too old for that stuff, and that he deserved to relax in his golden years. I tried talking to Tom about it, but he kept making excuses for his dad. He's just adjusting, or he's had a rough time lately, cut him some slack. Meanwhile, I was doing all the housework for 5 people, trying to keep up with my part-time job as a graphic designer, and still make time for the kids' activities. The situation was starting to affect my relationship with Tom. We'd argue in hushed tones after the kids went to bed, with me feeling unheard and Tom feeling torn between his wife and his father. Our date nights, which we used to have every Friday, had become a thing of the past. Carl always seemed to have some crisis or need that required Tom's attention just as we were about to leave. I tried to be patient, remembering the kind, fun-loving man Carl used to be. I suggested we all sit down and come up with a schedule or some house rules, but Carl would conveniently be out or claim he wasn't feeling well whenever I brought it up. Last week, things came to a head. I had taken a day off work to deep clean the house while everyone else was out. Carl had convinced Tom to take a day off too, saying they should take the kids to a baseball game for some family bonding time. They promised they'd be back by dinner. I spent hours scrubbing floors, dusting shelves, and organizing closets. I even tackled the garage, which had become Carl's de facto storage unit for all the random items he'd brought from his apartment or bought on his outings with Tom. As I was putting the finishing touches on the living room, arranging fresh flowers I'd bought to brighten up the space, I got a text from Tom. They were running late and had decided to grab dinner at the stadium. I was annoyed but figured at least I'd have a quiet evening to myself. They didn't return until 10 p.m. I was in bed reading when I heard them come in. The sound of laughter and shuffling feet quickly turned into gasps and hushed whispers. Curious, I went downstairs to find a disaster zone. They had tracked mud all over my freshly mopped floors. Greasy takeout containers were dumped on the clean kitchen counter, and Carl was in the process of opening a beer, the cap falling to the floor as he fumbled with the bottle opener. The kids looked exhausted and cranky. Lily was whining about a stomachache from too much junk food, and Max was on the verge of tears because he just remembered he had a book report due the next day that he hadn't started. Tom at least had the decency to look guilty, but Carl just grinned and said, "You should have come with us, Sarah. It was a hell of a game. I lost it." All the frustration and resentment of the past few months came pouring out. I yelled at all of them to get out of the house and not come back until they learned to respect my time and effort. I told Carl he was acting like a teenager instead of a grandfather, and I reminded Tom that he had responsibilities to this family that didn't include being his father's drinking buddy. Tom and the kids looked shocked and immediately started apologizing, but Carl just rolled his eyes and muttered something about me being too uptight and no fun anymore. I spent that night in the guest room, alternating between crying and seething with anger. The next morning, Tom tried to apologize again. He promised he'd talk to Carl and that things would change. The kids, looking sheepish, offered to help clean up the mess from the night before. Over the next few days, Tom and the kids made an effort to help out more. Tom took over the laundry duties and started making sure the kids finished their homework before any playtime. The kids set the table for dinner without being asked and even surprised me by cleaning their rooms without prompting. But Carl's attitude didn't change. He kept making snide comments about how I was turning everyone against him and ruining the fun. He'd dramatically sigh and turn down the TV volume when I was on work calls, making sure I noticed his sacrifice. After a week of this, I sat Tom down for a serious talk. I reminded him of how our relationship used to be before Carl moved in. How we used to have time for each other, how our home used to be a place of peace rather than constant tension. I pointed out how Carl's presence was affecting our family dynamics and my mental health. Tom listened, really listened, for the first time in months. He admitted that he'd been so focused on not disappointing his dad that he'd been disappointing his wife and kids instead. We talked long into the night, discussing options and trying to figure out the best way forward. In the end, we agreed that Carl had to go. It wasn't an easy decision, especially for Tom, but we both knew it was necessary for the health of our family. The next day, we told Carl he had a month to find a new living arrangement. We offered to help him look for affordable senior apartments or even to contribute a little financially if he needed it. But we were firm that he couldn't stay with us anymore. Carl didn't take it well. He threw a fit, accusing me of being heartless and manipulative. He claimed Tom was choosing that woman over his own flesh and blood. He's been giving me the silent treatment ever since, and some of Tom's relatives have been calling to say we're being cruel to poor old Carl. I feel guilty, but I also feel like I had no choice. Our home should be a haven for our family, not a source of constant stress. Tom is struggling with the decision, but he agrees it's for the best. The kids seem relieved, though they're sad to see their grandfather go. Ida for kicking out my father-in-law? Update when it's been a month since my last post, and a lot has happened. First, I want to thank everyone for their supportive comments and advice. It really helped me stand my ground during this difficult time. Carl moved out last week, but not without causing a huge scene. The day before he was supposed to leave, he invited a bunch of relatives over without telling us. When Tom and I came home from work, we found our living room full of people, including Tom's sister Emily, 42F, her husband Dave, 45M, and their kids, plus a couple of Tom's cousins. To give some context, Emily and Tom have always had a complicated relationship. Emily is 5 years older than Tom and was always the responsible one growing up. She followed in their father's footsteps, going into sales and quickly climbing the corporate ladder. Tom, on the other hand, took a more meandering path, trying out different careers before settling into his current job as a high school teacher. Emily and I have never been close. She'd always seemed to look down on me for choosing to work part-time after having kids, even though it was a decision Tom and I made together. She's very career-focused and often makes comments about how she doesn't know how I do it with such a limited income. So when I walked into a living room full of Emily's judgmental stares, I knew we were in for a rough evening. Carl had apparently spent the afternoon telling them all about how we were throwing him out on the street and tearing the family apart. He conveniently left out all the details about his behavior and how he'd refused to contribute to the household. Emily was particularly upset, saying we should be ashamed of ourselves for not taking care of family. She brought up how Carl had always been there for them, reminding Tom about the time Carl had paid for his college textbooks when Tom was short on cash, or how he'd helped Emily with the down payment on her first house. I tried to explain our side of the story, but Carl kept interrupting and twisting my words. He painted himself as a helpless victim, claiming we were forcing him out because we couldn't be bothered to take care of him in his old age. The cousins, Mike, 39M, and Laura, 36F, were a bit more sympathetic. They've had their own struggles with Carl's behavior at family gatherings, but they still felt we were being too harsh. Mike suggested we try family therapy before making any drastic decisions. As the argument heated up, old family grievances started to surface. Emily brought up how Tom had missed her wedding rehearsal dinner because he was too busy with his college girlfriend, me. Tom countered by reminding her how she'd criticized his career choice at every family dinner for years. It got so heated that Tom finally lost his patience and told everyone to leave. I'd never seen him so angry. He stood up and said, "This is our house, and we've made our decision. If you can't respect that, then you need to go." After they all left, Carl smugly told us he'd be staying with Emily and her family. I felt a twinge of guilt, knowing Emily had no idea what she was getting into, but I was also relieved that he'd be out of our house. The next day, as Carl was packing up his things, he accidentally knocked over a bookshelf, breaking several framed family photos. When I confronted him about it, he just shrugged and said, "Oops, guess I'm too old and clumsy to be careful." The look in his eyes told me it was anything but an accident. Tom helped his dad move his stuff to Emily's house, and when he came back, he looked exhausted. He told me Emily had already set up a Carl's corner in their living room, complete with his favorite recliner and TV. I couldn't help but feel a mix of sympathy and schadenfreude. Since Carl left, the atmosphere in our house has improved dramatically. The kids are back to doing their chores without complaint, and Tom has been much more helpful around the house. We've even started having family game nights again, something we hadn't done since before Carl moved in. Last weekend, we had our first date night in months. We went to our favorite Italian restaurant, the one where Tom had proposed all those years ago. As we sat there, enjoying our meal without any interruptions or worry about what chaos we might come home to, I saw the tension visibly leave Tom's shoulders. We talked about everything that had happened, really talked, in a way we hadn't been able to in months. Tom admitted that he'd been so caught up in trying to be a good son that he'd neglected being a good husband and father. He apologized for not standing up for me sooner and promised to do better. I shared my own feelings of guilt and frustration. I felt terrible for coming between Tom and his father, but I also knew we couldn't have continued living the way we were. We both acknowledged that the situation with Carl had brought some underlying issues in our relationship to the surface, and we committed to working on them together. However, the family drama isn't over. Emily has been posting passive-aggressive comments on social media about real family values and taking care of our elders. A few relatives have taken her side and have been giving us the cold shoulder. Tom's Aunt Susan, Carl's sister, called us to express her disappointment. She reminded us of how Carl had taken care of their mother in her final years and suggested we were being selfish. It was hard for Tom to hear, but he stood firm in our decision. On the other hand, Tom's cousin Laura reached out privately to offer her support. She shared some stories about Carl's behavior at family events that we hadn't known about, including an incident where he'd made inappropriate comments to her teenage daughter. Tom is struggling with the family tension, but he's standing firm in our decision. He told me he's realizing how much Carl has always manipulated family dynamics, and he's determined not to let it affect our immediate family anymore. We're planning to have a small family barbecue next weekend, inviting only the relatives who have been supportive or neutral about the situation. It feels good to be reclaiming our space and our family life, but I can't shake the feeling that this isn't the last we'll hear from Carl or his supporters. As for me, I'm trying to focus on the positives. Our home feels like ours again. The kids are happier and more settled. Tom and I are reconnecting in a way we haven't in years. It's not perfect, and we still have a lot to work through, but for the first time in months, I feel hopeful about our future. Update 2. Well, it's been another month, and the Carl saga continues. Remember how I mentioned feeling a mix of sympathy and schadenfreude when Carl moved in with Emily? Turns out, my instincts were right on the money. 2 weeks ago, Emily called Tom in tears. Apparently, living with Carl had become a nightmare. He was doing the same things at their house that he did at ours, interrupting routines, making messes, and refusing to help out. Emily, always the perfectionist, had a hard time adjusting to Carl's chaotic presence. She complained that he would leave the TV on at full volume late into the night, making it hard for her to get enough sleep before her early morning meetings. He'd rearrange the kitchen to his liking, leaving Emily frustrated when she couldn't find what she needed to make her morning smoothie. Dave, Emily's husband, was struggling too. He works from home as a software developer, and Carl's constant interruptions were making it hard for him to focus. Carl would barge into Dave's office unannounced, wanting to chat or show him something on his phone, completely disregarding Dave's work schedule. The final straw came when Carl reorganized Emily's home office without permission, resulting in her losing some important work documents. Emily had been preparing for a big presentation to her company's board of directors, and Carl's meddling had set her back significantly. She was facing potential disciplinary action at work because of the delay. Emily apologized profusely to us for not believing us earlier. She admitted that she had thought we were exaggerating about Carl's behavior, assuming that we just weren't trying hard enough to accommodate him. Now, she understood exactly what we had been dealing with. She asked if we had any advice on how to handle Carl, but stopped short of asking us to take him back. Tom spent hours on the phone with her, sharing strategies we had tried and offering moral support. It was strange to hear Emily, usually so confident and put together, sounding so defeated. A few days after that call, we got a surprise visit from Dave. He came alone, looking stressed and sleep-deprived. Over coffee, he confided that Carl's presence was putting a strain on his marriage. He and Emily were constantly arguing about how to handle Carl's behavior, and their kids were starting to act out in response to the tense atmosphere. Dave shared that their 15-year-old daughter, Megan, had started staying out late without permission, and their 12-year-old son, Jake, had been caught skipping school twice in the past week. Both kids were using the chaos at home as an excuse to push boundaries. Dave asked if we could talk to Carl, to try and make him understand the impact of his actions. He looked desperate, admitting that he'd even started looking into extended stay hotels as a way to get some peace and quiet. Tom agreed to talk to Carl, but I was skeptical. Still, we invited Carl over for dinner the following weekend, hoping to have a calm, rational discussion. That dinner was an experience. At first, Carl acted like nothing was wrong, chatting about baseball and complaining about the weather. He asked about the kids' school activities and even complimented me on the meal, something he'd rarely done when he lived with us. When Tom finally brought up the issues at Emily's house, Carl's demeanor changed completely. His face darkened, and he put down his fork with a clatter. He accused us of turning Emily and Dave against him, saying we were jealous of how much his grandkids loved him. He claimed Emily was overreacting to a few small mistakes, and that Dave had always had it out for him. According to Carl, Dave was just looking for an excuse to get rid of him because he was jealous of Carl's close relationship with Emily. Carl went on a long rant about how ungrateful his children were, how he'd sacrificed everything for them, and how we were all conspiring to make him miserable in his old age. He brought up ancient family history, blaming Tom for incidents that had happened decades ago when Tom was just a child. The conversation quickly devolved into Carl yelling and storming out of the house. As he left, he knocked over a potted plant by the door, soil spilling across the entryway. He didn't even pause or look back. Tom and I were left stunned, picking up the pieces, literally and figuratively. As we cleaned up the dirt from the fallen plant, we talked about how Carl's behavior seemed to be getting worse. We wondered if there might be more going on than just stubbornness and entitlement. The next day, we got calls from both Emily and Dave, thanking us for trying. They'd had a long talk after Carl came home in a rage from our dinner, and they've decided to give Carl an ultimatum. Either he starts respecting their home and contributing, or he'll need to find somewhere else to live. This whole situation has caused a major rift in Tom's extended family. Some relatives are siding with Carl, saying we're all being too harsh on a poor old man. Tom's Aunt Susan has been particularly vocal, calling us repeatedly to berate us for our treatment of Carl. Others have reached out to us privately, sharing similar experiences they've had with Carl over the years. Tom's cousin Mike, who had initially been sympathetic to Carl, called to apologize. He shared a story about Carl ruining his son's graduation party a few years back by getting drunk and picking a fight with Mike's father-in-law. Tom is struggling with guilt, wondering if we did the right thing by not letting Carl stay with us longer. He's been having trouble sleeping, often getting up in the middle of the night to look at old family photos. I'm trying to be supportive, but I'm also firm in my belief that we made the right choice for our family. We're now looking into senior living options in the area, thinking it might be the best solution for everyone involved. We found a few places that offer a good balance of independence and support, but we're not sure how to bring it up with Carl. Knowing him, I doubt he'll go quietly into any kind of retirement community. As for us, we're focusing on healing our immediate family. The kids are doing better without the constant disruption. Lily has started taking guitar lessons, something she'd been wanting to do for a while but never had the time for when Carl was around. Max's grades have improved, and his teacher commented on how much more focused he seems in class. Tom and I are working on rebuilding the connection that got lost in all the Carl-related stress. We've started having regular date nights again, even if it's just a quiet dinner at home after the kids are in bed. We're also seeing a marriage counselor to work through some of the issues that came up during Carl's stay. It's a work in progress, but I'm hopeful. This experience has been challenging, but it's also shown us how strong we can be as a family when we stand together. Update 3: It's been 3 months since my original post, and I'm here with what I hope will be the final update on the Carl situation. After the disastrous dinner at our house, things escalated quickly at Emily and Dave's. Carl's behavior worsened, to the point where he was actively undermining Emily and Dave's parenting. The last straw came when he gave their 13-year-old son a smartphone without their permission, saying they were too strict with their kids. This incident caused a huge blow-up in their household. Jake, their son, refused to give up the phone, leading to a standoff that lasted for days. Emily and Dave were furious with Carl for going behind their backs, especially since they'd had numerous conversations with him about respecting their parenting decisions. Emily and Dave finally followed through on their ultimatum and told Carl he had to leave. This set off a chain reaction in the family. Carl started calling relatives, trying to find someone else to take him in. Most made excuses, But our cousin Linda, 55F, agreed to let him stay for a little while. Linda lives alone in a small apartment, and I think she was lonely and saw this as an opportunity for some company. She remembered Carl as the fun uncle from her childhood and thought it might be nice to reconnect. I felt bad knowing what she was in for, but it wasn't my place to warn her. Tom and I, along with Emily and Dave, decided it was time for an intervention. We reached out to Carl's doctor and discovered that he hadn't been to a checkup in years. The doctor was concerned and agreed to help us convince Carl to come in for a full evaluation. It took some doing, but we managed to get Carl to agree to the checkup. We framed it as a requirement for the senior living communities we'd been researching, which wasn't entirely untrue. Carl grumbled about it but eventually gave in. The results were eye-opening. Carl was diagnosed with early-stage dementia, which explained some of his erratic behavior and forgetfulness. He also had untreated high blood pressure and diabetes, which were likely contributing to his mood swings. The diagnosis hit us all hard, especially Tom. There was a mix of relief at having an explanation for Carl's behavior, guilt for not noticing sooner, and fear about what the future might hold. Tom spent a lot of time researching dementia, trying to understand what his dad was going through and how we could help. With this new information, we had a family meeting, including Carl this time. It was tough, but we finally got through to him about the seriousness of his health situation. The doctor had recommended a specific assisted living facility that specializes in memory care, and after much discussion and, frankly, argument, Carl agreed to give it a try. The transition hasn't been smooth. Carl still has days where he insists he's fine and doesn't need help. He's called Tom more than once, demanding to be picked up and brought home. But the staff at the facility have been amazing, and they're slowly winning him over with activities he enjoys and a structured routine that seems to help with his symptoms. Tom visits him several times a week, and I go along sometimes with the kids. It's actually been good for our relationship with Carl. Without the stress of living together, we can enjoy our time with him more. The kids love telling him about school and showing him their artwork, and he seems more present and engaged than he was when he lived with us. The family rift is slowly healing. Emily and Dave have been our biggest allies through all of this, and we've grown much closer as a result. We've started having regular family dinners, something that would have been unthinkable a few months ago. Some of the relatives who initially sided with Carl have come around after learning about his health issues. Aunt Susan, who was one of our harshest critics, called to apologize. She shared that she'd been in denial about Carl's changing behavior because it reminded her too much of her late husband's struggle with Alzheimer's. A few family members are still upset with us, but Tom is learning to set boundaries and not let their opinions affect our family's well-being. He's been working with a therapist to process his feelings about his dad's condition and his changing role in the family. As for Tom and me, this whole experience has been a wake-up call. We've started having serious discussions about our own future plans, health directives, and what we want for our kids as we age. It's not always easy to talk about, but I feel like we're building a stronger foundation for our family's future. Looking back, I still believe we made the right choice in not letting Carl continue to live with us. While I wish we had pushed for medical intervention sooner, I know we did the best we could with the information we had at the time. It's been a challenging few months, but I'm cautiously optimistic about the future. Carl is getting the care he needs, our family relationships are on the mend, and our home is once again the peaceful haven it should be.